At some point, we went from this warm, iconic Marge voice that defined a generation
Well, if loving my kids is lame, then I guess I'm just a big lame.
to something that sounds completely different.
Homer, we just got invited to a wedding in the Poconos.
And look, I'm not here to bash anyone. Julie Kavner is an absolute legend. She's been voicing Marge Simpson for over 3 decades, and she's a huge part of why The Simpsons became what it is. But if you've watched recent episodes, you've probably noticed something. The voice has changed dramatically, and I mean really dramatically. Fans have been talking about it for years now, but it's reached a point where it's impossible to ignore. This isn't about calling for her to step down or anything like that. This is about understanding what's happened over 37 years of voicing one of TV's most iconic characters. What does that kind of commitment do to a voice? How have fans reacted as they've noticed the change? And what does this mean for the future of the show itself? Because here's the thing, when the voice of Marge Simpson, the emotional heart of the entire series, sounds this different from what we remember, it raises some real questions about how much longer this show can keep going. So today, we're diving into the evolution of Marge's voice, the physical toll it's taken on Julie Kavner, and why this might be the clearest sign yet that The Simpsons needs to think about an ending. It's not an easy conversation, but it's one worth having. The story of Marge's voice actually starts with something most people don't know. Julie Kavner never auditioned for the role. She didn't have to. Back in 1987, she was already working on The Tracy Ullman Show when producer James L. Brooks needed voices for some new animated shorts. Instead of hiring new actors, they just asked the people already on set. Kavner and Dan Castellaneta got the job. And that's how Marge and Homer were born. But here's the wild part. Kavner's voice wasn't really an act. In a 1992 interview with the Chicago Tribune, she explained it simply. She has a bump on her vocal cords. That's why her voice sounds the way it does. The New York Times once described her natural speaking voice as honeyed gravel. So when she voices Marge, she's not doing some massive character transformation. She's just slightly adjusting what's already there. That distinctive raspy warmth that made Marge so memorable, that was mostly just Julie Kavner being herself. The first Simpsons short aired in April 1987. Kavner was 36 years old. The recording setup was primitive. Portable tape decks in a makeshift studio above the Tracy Ullman set. Nobody knew this little animated family would become anything significant. But when The Simpsons got its own series in December 1989, Kavner was locked in for what would become the ride of her life. Over 750 episodes and counting. And she doesn't just voice Marge, she also does Marge's sisters, Patty and Selma, plus their mother Jacqueline. All of them require that same raspy, strained quality. Imagine doing that for nearly 4 decades. The early years were magic. If you go back and watch seasons 1 through 8, you hear a completely different Marge. There's warmth there, patience, a strength mixed with vulnerability that made her the emotional center of the show. Voice coaches who've analyzed her performance talk about how she could convey genuine emotion without ever losing the character. In 1992, Kavner won an Emmy for Outstanding Voiceover Performance for the episode I Married Marge. That performance showcased everything she could do. The range, the depth, the heart. Fans and critics agree. Those first 8 seasons represent Marge's vocal peak. The voice had this relaxed quality. It never felt forced. When Marge got emotional, you felt it. When she was exhausted from dealing with Homer's latest disaster, you heard it. The voice worked because it felt real, but that was then. Somewhere around the late 2000s, people started noticing changes. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small shifts. The voice sounded a little harder, a little more strained. By the mid-2000s, longtime fans were comparing old episodes to new ones and hearing a massive difference. The warmth was fading, the ease was gone. What replaced it was something that honestly sounded painful. Many fans point to the Simpsons movie in 2007 as a potential turning point. There's a scene where Marge records an emotional video message for Homer. It's heartbreaking, raw, vulnerable. Director David Silverman later revealed that scene took between 100 and 150 takes to get right. They were pushing Kavner hard, trying to capture a woman who was completely broken. Silverman said she worked incredibly hard at it. The performance was praised. Critics called it the most heartfelt moment ever in a Simpsons project. But here's what fans started wondering. Did those 150 takes cause permanent damage? It's impossible to know for sure. Kavner has never publicly addressed it, but if you compare her voice in episodes before 2007 to episodes after, there's a noticeable shift. Some fans swear that's when everything changed. Whether it was the movie or just natural aging or cumulative strain from years of recording, something definitely happened around that time. The decline continued through the 2010s and into the 2020s. By recent seasons, the difference difference is undeniable. Fan communities started creating timelines, tracking the changes season by season. The voice that used to sound warm now sounds worn out, exhausted. Some episodes, it genuinely sounds like it hurts her to speak, and that's not an exaggeration. That's what fans are saying, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine concern. So what's actually happening to her voice? Let's talk about the science. As people age, their vocal cords naturally change. They get thinner. They lose elasticity. For someone like Kavner, who already had an abnormality on her vocal cords, aging compounds the problem. Add in 37 years of performing a voice that requires strain, and you've got a recipe for serious vocal fatigue. There's actually a medical condition called Bogart-Bacall syndrome. It's named after Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, both famous for their distinctively low, raspy voices. The syndrome describes chronic vocal fatigue caused by prolonged use of lower vocal registers. It's an occupational hazard for actors who maintain character voices over long periods, and it can cause permanent changes. Voice acting is physically demanding in ways people don't realize. Sessions can last hours. You're pushing your voice in unnatural ways, over and over. Marisa Dargahi, a voice coach, explained to Newsweek that when you choose a character voice early in a project, you need to make sure it's sustainable. You need to be able to maintain it in a healthy way. The problem is, back in 1987, nobody thought The Simpsons would still be running in 2025. Nobody planned for sustainability over 4 decades. And Kavner isn't alone in facing these challenges. Other voice actors have experienced similar issues. Sean Schemmel, who voices Goku in Dragon Ball, actually passed out in the recording booth during intense scenes. Male Flanagan, the voice of Naruto, spent years adjusting her technique to avoid permanent damage. Casey Kasem's voice as Shaggy noticeably lost its youthful quality around 2006 and 2007. Fans frequently compare that situation to what's happening with Kavner. It's just the reality of the job, but there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complicated. Julie Kavner is famously private. And when I say famous, I mean it's written into her contract. She has a clause that states she never has to promote The Simpsons on video, ever. She rarely performs Marge's voice in public because, as she's explained, it destroys the illusion. People need to believe these are real characters, not just actors in a booth. The New York Times once described her as nearly reclusive. In one of the few times she ever demonstrated Marge's voice publicly, on David Letterman's show in 1994, she literally turned away from the camera before speaking. She didn't want her own face associated with the character. This level of privacy extends to her entire life. She was in a relationship with producer David Davis for over 45 years, and most people didn't even know about it until after he passed in 2022. Friends she'd known for years had never seen her home. Nancy Cartwright, who voices Bart, described Kavner in her memoir as a workhorse with extraordinary professionalism. She's rarely late. She does whatever the character needs. Director Nora Ephron noted that Kavner has so little vanity, it's almost unsettling. She'll do anything for the character if it makes sense to her. So if Kavner is dealing with vocal issues or health problems, she's chosen not to share that publicly. We're left observing from the outside, noticing the changes, but not knowing the full story. Then came December 2023. The official Simpsons X account posted a clip, just a regular scene from a recent episode. Nothing special, except the voice. People who hadn't watched the show in years suddenly heard Marge speak and were genuinely shocked.
Homer, we just got invited to a wedding in the Poconos.
The clip went viral, over 10 million views, and the comments section exploded. One person wrote, "I haven't watched The Simpsons in quite some time, so can somebody please explain what has happened to Marge's voice?" Others brought up the movie theory. The actress did over 100 takes of Marge filming a video for Homer in the movie. Apparently, that's what did it irreversibly for her vocal cords. The reaction wasn't mean-spirited. It was concerned. People weren't demanding she be replaced. They were worried. Some said they couldn't watch recent episodes because hearing her voice made them uncomfortable. It sounded painful. Others pointed out that vocal changes are a natural part of aging and nobody should blame the actors. But the consensus was clear. Something has fundamentally changed, and it's impossible to ignore anymore. Video essays started popping up. TikTok exploded with reaction videos and discussions. Over 9 million posts related to the topic. Fans compared clips from the 90s to clips from 2023 and 2024. The difference was staggering. What used to sound effortless now sounds labored. What used to convey warmth now conveys exhaustion, and people couldn't stop talking about it. This brings us to the bigger question. What happens next? The Simpsons has been renewed through season 40. When that airs, Julie Kavner will be 78 years old. There's also a Simpsons movie sequel scheduled for September 2027. Fans immediately raised concerns. If a single recording session in 2007 7 potentially caused lasting damage, what will another feature film demand do? The cast has been through multiple contract battles over the years. In 1998, Fox literally threatened to replace all 6 main voice actors and started hiring casting directors nationwide. The actors won that fight, and their salaries jumped from $30,000 to $125,000 per episode. By 2004, they were making $250,000 per episode. By 2008, around $400,000. But then in 2011, Fox demanded massive pay cuts. They wanted 45% reductions and threatened to cancel the show after season 23. The cast accepted 30% cuts to save the show. They're now making around $300,000 per episode. Harry Shearer, who voices Mr. Burns and Ned Flanders, actually announced he was leaving in 2015 over contract disputes. He came back 2 months later, but it showed the tension behind the scenes. And Shearer himself is dealing with similar vocal decline. He's 81 now, and fans note that Mr. Burns sounds rough, really rough. Some joke that he now sounds too old to play a 100-year-old man. In November 2024, Pamela Hayden retired after 35 years of voicing characters like Milhouse. She was recast with a human actor, not AI, but the AI question looms over everything now. Companies already offer Marge Simpson AI voice products that simulate Kavner's recordings. Hank Azaria wrote an op-ed in February 2025 expressing his fears. He said AI will soon be able to recreate all 100-plus voices he's created for The Simpsons over 4 decades, and it makes him sad to think about. The unofficial word, according to fans close to production, is that producers won't recast Marge until Kavner is ready to give up the role. There's some speculation that Marge gets fewer lines in recent seasons, though that hasn't been confirmed. For singing scenes, they've occasionally used substitutes. Kristen Bell provided Marge's singing voice in one episode, but for speaking, that's still all Kavner, for now. So where does this leave us? Julie Kavner gave us 37 years of one of television's most iconic voices. She won an Emmy. She helped create a character that became the emotional heart of the longest-running scripted series in TV history, and she did it while fiercely protecting the integrity of that character through extreme personal privacy. The decline in her voice isn't up for debate. It's documented across decades of recordings. What's remarkable is her continued commitment despite the obvious strain. Fans aren't angry. They're sad. They're concerned. They're grateful for what she's given us while also recognizing that maybe, just maybe, it's time for The Simpsons to consider an ending. Not because Kavner needs to be replaced, but because hearing her struggle through recent episodes feels wrong. It feels like watching someone push past their limits for a show that's been running on fumes for years anyway. Julie Kavner is a legend. Marge Simpson is iconic, and sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for both is to recognize when the story has run its course. That's it for this one. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Peace.